Alien girl spit in the human's face at the bidding block. Now she sleeps in his shirt. The glob of pearlescent saliva hit Jack square on the cheek, thick and warm. It slid down his jaw, a deliberate, disgusting trail. A collective gasp echoed through the makeshift arena, a cavernous space carved from the guts of a crashed dreadnought. Rust and ozone filled the air. Jax, shackled to a metal plate on the raised platform, didn't flinch. He just stared. He'd been captured by xeno-mercenaries, stripped of his gear, and thrown onto this block like a piece of livestock. He'd expected pain, humiliation, maybe a quick death. He hadn't expected this. The alien woman before him was a sculpture of lethal grace. Tall, with skin that shimmered like oil on water, shifting from deep violet to metallic bronze under the flickering emergency lights. Her features were sharp, angular, and utterly confident. She wore piecemeal armor over a tight-fitting black undersuit, highlighting curves that were both terrifying and hypnotic. She'd strode right past the bellowing four-armed auctioneer, ignoring his protests as she stepped onto the block. She'd circled Jax once, her dark, almond-shaped eyes raking over him, assessing. Then she'd stopped, leaned in close enough for him to smell the strange, spicy scent clinging to her, and spit. What in the seven hells was that? The auctioneer, a corpulent ortolan, squawked, his jowls quivering. Vala, that's not part of the process. The bid stands at 40,000 credits. The alien, Vala, ignored him. Her gaze was locked with Jax's. A slow, dangerous smile curled her lips. He is challenged, she said, her voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated in Jax's bones. The bid is irrelevant. Jax finally wiped the spit from his face with his shoulder, the rough fabric of his tunic scratching his skin. Lady, if you wanted a date, you could have just asked, he rasped, his throat raw. I'm expensive, but I'm not that expensive. Her smile widened. It was not a friendly expression. It was the smile of a predator that had just cornered its favorite meal. Your currency is meaningless. Your bravado, however, has value. The crowd was buzzing now, a mixture of outrage and frantic excitement. Whispers in a dozen alien dialects filled the space. The mercenaries guarding the stage looked at each other, their insectoid faces betraying confusion. This was off script. The auctioneer sputtered. Challenged. He's human chattel. There is no challenge. Highest bidder takes the asset. Now back away from the merchandise or I'll have my guards. Your guards will do nothing, Vala interrupted, her tone dropping, turning to solid steel. She still hadn't looked away from Jax. I have invoked the right of defiance. The mail is mine to test, unless someone here wishes to challenge my claim. She let her gaze sweep across the assembled scum and villainy. No one met her eyes. Even the heavily armed mercs took an involuntary step back. Jax felt a strange, unwelcome thrill shoot through him. This was a new kind of trouble, and for the first time in days he felt something other than numb resignation. He felt a spark of dangerous curiosity. He met her predatory smile with a smirk of his own. So what's the test, sweetheart? A staring contest? Because I gotta warn you, I'm pretty fucking good. Her smile vanished, replaced by an intensity that was almost physical. You have no idea. The ortolan auctioneer, seeing his commission evaporate, made one last desperate plea. This is an unsanctioned proceeding. Craig's syndicate property is not subject to obscure tribal rituals. The sale must continue. Vala finally turned from Jax, a fluid movement that was all coiled power. She looked down at the auctioneer from the height of the platform. You are Craig's syndicate? She asked, her voice deceptively soft. I represent their interests in this sector, yes, he stammered, puffing out his chest. Vala reached into a pouch on her hip and pulled out a small, heavy-looking data chip. She tossed it down. It clattered on the grimy floor at the Ortolan's feet. There. 100,000 standard credits. I am not buying the mail. I am buying your silence and your immediate departure from my presence. The auctioneer stared at the chip, his greed warring with his indignation. Greed won. He snatched it up, his fleshy fingers closing around it. The asset is yours, he mumbled before turning and waddling off the stage as fast as his short legs could carry him. Vala's attention snapped back to Jax. She gestured to two of her own soldiers who had been standing near the edge of the crowd, both clad in the same dark armor as her. They moved with silent efficiency, mounting the platform. One of them produced a plasma torch and began cutting through the thick bolts holding Jax's shackles to the floor. "So, you just bought me," Jax said, testing the give in his restraints. "For 100 grand. I'm flattered, and a little offended. I'm worth at least 150. "I told you," she said, circling him again, her eyes narrowed. "I didn't buy you. I bought the right to see if you are worthy of the air you breathe." The last bolt gave way with a shower of sparks, and the shackle fell from his ankle. Jax rolled his shoulders, the muscles screaming in protest. The second soldier unlocked his wrist cuffs. For the first time in a week, he was free. He was also unarmed, surrounded, and in the clutches of a terrifyingly beautiful alien who seemed to think he was some kind of ritual sacrifice. Progress, of a sort. "All right," he said, rubbing his raw wrists. "Let's get this over with. What's the first trial? Arm wrestling? Reciting bad poetry? If it's singing, we're all screwed." "Your constant noise is the first trial," Vala stated flatly. "And you are failing it." She nodded to her guards. "Bring him." They grabbed his arms. Jax didn't resist. There was no point. He let them lead him off the platform and through the parting crowd. The onlookers stared, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity on their bizarre faces. They were herded through a maze of corridors, the walls groaning under the weight of the dead warship. It was a city of scavengers and criminals, built in the metal corpse of a forgotten war. Finally, they arrived at a heavy blast door that hissed open to reveal her private quarters. It wasn't luxurious. It was a Spartan functional space with a weapon rack, a command console, and a simple cot. The guards shoved him inside and chained his left wrist to a thick pipe running along the wall. The chain was long enough to let him reach the cot and a small sanitation unit, but not much else. Then they left, the door sealing behind them with a heavy thud. It was just the two of them. She stood in the center of the room, watching him. "Now," she said, "the rite can begin." Jax slumped against the wall, the chain clanking. "You know, where I come from, we call this kidnapping. And we have a saying, don't shit where you eat. You might want to look that one up." Vala tilted her head, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "You wish to defecate on your food? A strange custom? A test of dominance over your own sustenance?" Jax stared at her. Was she serious? "No, it means don't cause trouble in your own home. Metaphorically. We have no time for metaphors," she said, dismissing the thought as she began to unstrap the plates of her armor. "We have time only for truth. The truth of strength. The truth of will." Each piece of armor she removed revealed more of the sleek black undersuit and more of the powerful body beneath. Spitting on you was a claim, a question. Are you a male of substance, or are you merely flesh waiting for a purpose? Now you will answer. He watched her strip off her armor, stacking it neatly on the weapons rack. The black undersuit clung to her like a second skin, accentuating every dangerous curve. The air in the small room grew thick, charged with a tension that was more than just fear. It was intimate, terrifyingly so. Jax leaned his head back against the cold metal wall. "Look, lady, Vala, I'm just a guy who picked the wrong cargo to smuggle. I'm not a prophecy, I'm not a chosen one, I'm just unlucky. You've got the wrong man." "There are no wrong men," she replied, her voice low and certain. She turned to face him fully, her arms crossed over her chest. "Only weak ones. The right will determine which you are." "And if I'm a weak one?" Jax challenged, his sarcasm the only weapon he had left. "What happens then? You kill me, enslave me, make me your personal back-scratcher?" A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "If you are weak, you will serve. You will carry my pack, you will clean my rifle, you will warm my bed, and you will do so with gratitude, for I will have given your worthless life a purpose." Jax let out a short, harsh laugh. "Oh, you're a real humanitarian. And if I'm not weak, if I pass your little test?" The smile faded. Her expression became deadly serious. "If you prove you are not weak, you will be my equal, my partner, bonded by the right. We will face our enemies together. We will share our victories and we will share our heat." Jax's breath hitched. There it was, the part he'd been waiting for. This wasn't just about dominance. It was about mating. A fucked-up high-stakes job interview for the position of alien boy toy, or partner. The line seemed terrifyingly thin. "So what is this great test of will?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. You going to make me watch you field strip a plasma rifle blindfolded? The full rite of defiance has many stages, she explained, her tone becoming formal, almost liturgical. A trial of blood, a trial of shadow, and a trial of spirit. The claiming was the first step. But we do not have the luxury of time or sacred ground. The Craig Syndicate will not take my defiance lightly. They will hunt us. Just as she said it, a distant alarm began to blare, a low guttural klaxon that echoed through the ship's metal bones. Vala's head snapped toward the door. They are faster than I anticipated. They have locked down the sector. They will be sweeping floor by floor. She looked from the door back to Jax, a new calculating light in her eyes. This changes things. The trial of blood and shadow must now be one and the same. Survival. Escaping this wreck is now your test. She strode over to him, producing a small, sharp key. If you help me get out of here, I'll consider the rite fulfilled? Jax asked, a sliver of hope in his voice. She knelt, her face inches from his. He could see the intricate, almost crystalline structure of her dark eyes. No. If you help me escape, I will consider you strong enough to face the final trial. The trial of spirit. She unlocked the cuff on his wrist. Now, human. Show me you are more than just a loud voice and a handsome face. He rubbed his freed wrist, the sudden liberty disorienting. Handsome? You think I'm handsome? A flicker of something, annoyance, amusement, crossed her face. It is a simple observation of your symmetrical features. Do not mistake it for, what is your term? A compliment. Your species is aesthetically pleasing but notoriously fragile. She stood and grabbed a wicked-looking pulse rifle from the rack, tossing a heavy blaster pistol to him. It felt good in his hand. Solid. Real. Stay close, do what I say, and try not to die, she commanded. If you die, you fail. Yeah, I figured that part out, Jax muttered, checking the pistol's charge. Let's go. The klaxon wailed, a soundtrack for the galaxy's worst first date. The blast door hissed open into chaos. Red emergency strobes painted the corridor in frantic, pulsing light. Figures in the distance, Craig mercenaries were shouting, their forms silhouetted against the strobes. Vala didn't hesitate. She pointed down a dark maintenance passage to their left. This way. The main conduits are too well guarded. Jax didn't need telling twice. He followed her into the narrow passage, the air immediately growing hotter and tasting of scorched wiring. They moved fast, a blur of motion through the guts of the ship. It was a labyrinth of pipes, crawl spaces, and precarious catwalks over chasms that dropped into the vessel's dead core. He had to give her credit. She knew this wreck like the back of her hand. She moved with an animal grace, silent and sure-footed. Jax, a smuggler used to the tight confines of his own ship, was no slouch either. He kept pace, his senses on high alert, the blaster pistol held ready. They'll be tracking your transponder, Jax grunted as they squeezed through a gap between two colossal, humming power converters. They know you're in this sector. I have no transponder, she shot back, not even breathing hard. I am not a registered citizen of this pathetic system. They are hunting blind, but they have numbers. They came to a junction, a wider catwalk overlooking a massive cargo bay, where more mercs were setting up a checkpoint. Vila held up a hand, pressing them both flat against a bulkhead. She was so close he could feel the heat radiating from her body. Her spicy scent filled his nostrils, sharp and intoxicating. It was doing strange things to his concentration. A mercenary patrol passed directly below them, their helmet lamps cutting through the gloom. Jax held his breath. One of the mercs, a lanky reptilian, paused, looking up as if he'd heard something. Vala's body tensed next to his. She drew a long, curved knife from her boot, the metal dark and non-reflective. The merc scanned the catwalks for a long moment, then shrugged and moved on. Vala didn't relax until the patrol was out of sight. They are thorough, she whispered, her breath brushing his ear. A shiver, completely involuntary, ran down his spine. They want their 100 grand back, Jax whispered back. Plus interest, probably in the form of your head. She glanced at him, her dark eyes unreadable in the gloom. They can try to collect. They continued their descent, deeper into the ship. The air grew heavier, thick with the smell of old lubricants and decay. At one point, A section of catwalk, weakened by centuries of neglect, gave way under Vala's foot. She cried out, a short, sharp sound of surprise, as her leg plunged through the rusted metal. Before Jax could even think, he reacted. He lunged, grabbing her by the straps of her armor and hauling her back onto the solid part of the walkway with a grunt of effort. He was stronger than he looked. She stumbled against him, her solid frame pressed flush against his for a heartbeat. He held her steady, his hand on her arm. "You all right?" he asked, his voice rough. Vala pushed herself away, her expression a strange mix of shock and something else, something he couldn't name. It was the first time he'd seen her anything less than perfectly in control. The dominance had reversed, if only for a second. "The structure was compromised," she stated, avoiding his eyes as she checked her leg. A shallow cut oozed a dark violet liquid. "Your reflexes are adequate." "Adequate? I just saved you from becoming a permanent art installation in the ship's rectum." Jax shot back, a grin tugging at his lips. A simple thank you would suffice. She finally looked at him, and the intensity was back, but it was different now. Less hostile, more focused. "Gratitude is for the weak who cannot save themselves," she said. "But your action was noted." She turned and continued on, her limp barely noticeable. Jax watched her go, the grin fading. Her words were a dismissal, but her eyes had told a different story. The trial was changing, and so were they. They found refuge in a derelict hydroponics bay. The glass ceiling was shattered, letting in the dim, alien twilight of the planet's twin moons. Strange, skeletal trees, long dead, stood like sentinels in their planters. It was quiet here, the alarms a distant, muffled pulse. The mercs wouldn't think to look in a dead-end section like this. Not yet, anyway. Vala sank to the floor, leaning against a large planter. She finally let out a long, shuddering breath. The escape had taken its toll. Her undersuit was torn at the knee, and the cut on her leg was still sluggishly weeping its dark blood. Jax kept watch at the doorway, pistol ready, listening to the silence. It felt louder than the alarms had. After a few minutes, he turned back to her. "That cut needs to be cleaned," he said, his voice quiet in the cavernous space. "My people have regenerative capabilities," she said, though her voice lacked its usual steel. It was strained. "It will heal. It'll get infected first," he countered, walking over. He knelt in front of her, gesturing to her leg. "Let me see." She hesitated, then slowly, reluctantly, extended her leg. Jax tore a strip of cloth from the bottom of his own tunic. He gently wiped away the grime and blood around the wound. Her skin was cool to the touch and smooth like polished stone. As he worked, he felt her eyes on him, studying his every move. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. Not the tension of a fight, but the tension of the moment just before one. "This is the final trial, isn't it?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't look up from her leg. "The trial of spirit." Vala was silent for a long moment. "The rite is meant to be a crucible," she said finally, her voice low and raspy. "To burn away lies and weakness, leaving only the truth of who we are. In a sacred arena, with ritual words, with witnesses." She looked around the dead garden. "Not in a place like this. We work with what we've got," Jax said, tying the makeshift bandage around her leg. He pulled the knot tight and his fingers brushed the bare skin of her calf. A jolt, like static electricity, passed between them. He looked up, and his breath caught in his throat. Her face was inches from his. The mask of the cocky warrior was gone. In its place was something raw, vulnerable, and fiercely intense. "The trial of spirit is a contest of will," she whispered, "to see whose spirit is stronger, whose desire is greater. The one who yields submits." "Submits to what?" he whispered back, his heart hammering against his ribs. "To the other's dominance," she said, her dark eyes searching his. "But you did not let me fall. You pulled me back. You did not act like a slave." "I'm not a slave," he said, his voice a low growl. "And I'm not going to be." A challenge. He saw it in her eyes. The final test. "Then prove it," she breathed. She surged forward, not to kiss him, but to attack. She grabbed the front of his tunic, her strength immense, and threw him onto his back on the soft, mossy ground. She was on top of him in an instant, pinning his arms with her knees, her face a mask of predatory focus. The fight was on. It wasn't about escape anymore. It was about this. About everything that had been building between them since she'd spit in his face. It was a raw, desperate grapple for control. He bucked, trying to throw her off, but she was like a rock. He twisted, getting a hand free, and grabbed her arm, using her momentum to roll them over. Now he was on top, straddling her hips, his hands pinning her wrists to the ground above her head. She was strong, her muscles straining against his hold, but he had the leverage. Her chest heaved, her lips parted as she gasped for air. Her eyes, wild and dark, were locked on his. He held her down, the muscles in his arms screaming with the effort. She was impossibly strong, a whirlwind of controlled fury beneath him. For a moment, he had the upper hand. He was the dominant one. He saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes, the shock of being overpowered, but then it melted into something else, something hotter, darker, a challenge. "Is this your will, human?" She panted, her voice a guttural rasp. "To hold a woman down. Is this the strength you wish to show me?" Her words were a razor slicing through the haze of adrenaline. He wasn't a brute. He wasn't like the mercs who'd caged him. He was proving a point, not asserting a right. With a curse, he released her wrists. It was a gamble, a concession, but it was the only move he had left that wasn't a violation. The moment he let go, she moved. Not to attack him, but to hook a leg around his, twisting with fluid grace until they were on their sides, face to face, tangled together. She didn't try to pin him again. Instead, she reached up and cupped his jaw, her thumb tracing the line of his stubble. Her touch was no longer violent. It was searching, questioning. "You yielded," she whispered, her voice filled with a strange wonder. "No," he growled, his hand finding the curve of her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. "I changed the rules." Her lips crashed against his. It wasn't a kiss of affection. It was a collision, a branding. It was fierce and hungry, full of all the tension and violence and fear of the last few hours. Her mouth was demanding, her teeth grazing his lip, and he gave as good as he got, a raw claiming of his own. The fight wasn't over. It had just changed arenas. His hands tore at the ripped fabric of her undersuit, seeking the skin beneath. She clawed at his tunic, ripping it open, her cool fingers splaying across the heat of his chest. This wasn't seduction. It was a storm, a desperate, primal need to close a circuit that had been live and sparking between them from the very start. He pushed her onto her back again, but this time it was an invitation, not a pinning. Her legs wrapped around his waist, pulling him in, a silent, urgent command. There were no more words, no more trials. There was only this, the frantic push and pull, the scrape of skin on skin, the ragged gasps that were the only sound in the dead garden. It was a frantic, messy joining, driven by adrenaline and a desperation that went beyond mere lust. It was a fight to erase the lines between them, to forge something new in the crucible of their shared danger. He drove into her, and she met his every thrust with a fierce energy of her own, her nails digging into the muscles of his back. It was a struggle that wasn't a struggle, a battle where the only victory was mutual surrender. As the peak began to build, a white-hot nova coiling in his gut, he saw her eyes widen. Her body arched, a silent scream on her lips. In that moment, she wasn't a warrior or a challenger. She was just Vala. And as the climax ripped through him, a raw, guttural shout torn from his throat, he felt her teeth sink into the flesh of his shoulder, a sharp, clean pain that was both a mark of possession and an act of surrender. The rite was complete. Not in submission, but in a messy, violent, breathtaking equality. They lay tangled in the moss and dirt, their bodies slick with sweat, the silence of the hydroponics bay slowly seeping back in. Jax's lungs burned. His heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of his chest. The bite on his shoulder throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. He could feel her blood, dark and sticky, on his fingers where he'd gripped her leg. He turned his head, looking at her. Vala's eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling in deep, shuddering breaths. The fierce warrior mask was completely gone, leaving behind a startling vulnerability. Her shimmering skin seemed softer in the dim moonlight, her sharp features less severe. He had no idea what to say. "Sorry about your undersuit?" That was intense. Every sarcastic deflection he normally used felt hollow and stupid. This was something else entirely. This wasn't a one-night stand in a grimy spaceport cantina. This had weight. Rules he didn't understand. Consequences he couldn't yet see. Finally, she opened her eyes. They were dark and deep, and they weren't looking at him with anger or triumph. They were looking at him with a profound, unnerving clarity. "You did not break," she whispered, her voice husky. "I didn't want to break you," he said, the admission costing him more than he'd expected. "I just wanted you to see me." "I see you," she said, and the simple words landed with the force of a physical blow. She reached up, not to his face, but to the fresh bite mark on his shoulder. Her fingers traced its edges gently. "The claiming is answered. The blood is shared. The spirit is met." She paused, her gaze holding his. "The bond is forged." Jax felt a cold dread mix with the fading heat of their passion. "Bond? What the hell does that mean? I thought this was just a test." "It was," she confirmed. "A test to see if a bond was possible. You did not submit. I did not conquer. We met in the storm. This," she touched his shoulder again, then her own lips, "makes us one. The eyes of my people, you are my mate." Jack stared at her, his mind reeling. "Mate? As in husband? As in we send out little announcement cards and my Aunt Carol knits us a fucking throw blanket?" Her brow furrowed in confusion at his words. "There is no blanket. There is only the bond. It is a tether. I will feel your pain. You will feel my strength. Your enemies are mine. My honor is yours to defend." He let out a shaky breath, a sound that was half laugh, half groan. He'd gone from prisoner to test subject to bonded mate in the span of a few hours. His life was officially a complete and utter shit show. "So that's it? We're stuck with each other?" "We are bound to each other," she corrected, her tone laced with a fierce possessiveness that was both terrifying and strangely thrilling. "It cannot be undone." Suddenly, the crackle of a comm unit shattered the quiet. A metallic voice, distorted and close. "No life signs in this sector. Grid 7 Delta is dead. Let's check the old hydroponics bay and head back." Shit. They'd found them. Vala was on her feet in an instant, all business, the vulnerability vanishing like a phantom. She snatched up his blaster pistol and her rifle. "They're coming," she said, her voice low and urgent. The test was over. The consequences were just beginning. The mercenaries were professionals. No shouting, no wasted movement. Jax heard the soft scrape of their boots on the metal floor outside the bay entrance, the quiet clicks of their weapons being readied. There were at least 4 of them, maybe 5. Vala pressed herself against the wide planter near the entrance, her pulse rifle held low. She glanced at Jax, her eyes hard as diamonds. There was no question, no command, just a shared understanding. We fight or we die. He took up a position on the opposite side of the doorway, his back against the cool Duracrete. The blaster pistol felt like a part of his own hand. He was a smuggler, not a soldier, but he'd been in enough scrapes to know how to handle himself. But this was different. He wasn't just fighting for his own skin anymore. He was fighting for the insane, terrifying woman who had claimed him. He was fighting for them. "On my mark," she breathed, her voice so low it was barely a sound. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the entrance. The first mercenary, a hulking, Krogan-like brute, stepped through the doorway. He was a wall of muscle and armor, his shotgun sweeping the room. Vala didn't wait for him to get his bearings. She rose from her cover in a single fluid motion and fired. The pulse rifle coughed once, a sharp, energetic thud. The bolt of blue energy hit the merc square in the chest, punching through his armor like it was paper. He went down without a sound. "Now!" she yelled. Jax pivoted around the edge of the planter as the other 3 mercs stormed in, firing wildly. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, chewing up chunks of the dead trees and planters around them. He squeezed off 2 quick shots. The first went wide, but the second caught a slender insectoid merc in the leg. The alien shrieked and went down, writhing. The remaining 2 mercs were smart. They split up, using the planters for cover, laying down suppressing fire. Jax was pinned. "Human!" Vala shouted over the din. "To your left, the irrigation conduit." He risked a glance. A large, rusty pipe ran along the wall, with a heavy valve wheel attached. An idea, insane and desperate, sparked in his mind. "Cover me," he yelled back. He didn't wait for a reply. He knew she would. He broke from his cover, sprinting across the open ground. A plasma bolt seared past his head, so close he felt the heat on his cheek. Vala's rifle answered with a rapid-fire burst, forcing the mercs to duck and giving Jax the precious seconds he needed. He reached the valve and gripped it with both hands. It was frozen with rust. He put his entire body into it, his muscles screaming in protest. With a groan of tortured metal, the wheel began to turn. Vala was a demon. She moved with a dancer's grace and a killer's economy, her rifle spitting death. She took down the third merc with a precise shot to the helmet's visor. The last one, a human in battered syndicate armor, saw what Jax was doing and charged him, firing his pistol. Jax let go of the wheel, diving to the side as the shots went wide, impacting the pipe with loud clangs. He landed hard, the blaster flying from his hand. The merc stood over him, leveling his pistol for the kill shot. "Should have stayed on the block, asshole," the merc snarled. A blur of motion. Vala slammed into the merc's side like a freight train. The shot went wild, blasting a hole in the shattered ceiling. Her rifle was empty, but she didn't need it. Her knife was in her hand, a dark sliver of death. The fight was short and brutal. It was a flurry of blocks, strikes, and grapples. Jax watched, breathless, as she moved. This was her element. She wasn't just a warrior, she was an artist, and her medium was violence. She ended it by disarming him and driving the knife into the weak spot under his arm. The merc gasped, his eyes wide with surprise before slumping to the ground. The bay fell silent again, the only sound their own ragged breathing. The silence that followed was thick with the scent of ozone and blood. 4 bodies lay scattered among the dead plants. Vala stood over the last mercenary, pulling her knife free with a wet, clinical sound. She wiped the dark blade on the dead man's tunic, her movements economical and precise. Jax pushed himself to his feet, his body aching. He retrieved his blaster pistol, his hand shaking slightly from the adrenaline dump. He looked at her, standing there amidst the carnage she had so expertly created, and he felt a surge of something he couldn't deny. Profound, absolute respect. She was terrifying, she was magnificent, she was his. The thought was no longer as frightening as it had been. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. She walked over, not to the bodies but to his pack, which her guards had tossed into her quarters and he'd managed to grab on their way out. She rummaged through it and pulled out one of his spare shirts, a plain gray synth cotton shirt, worn soft from 100 wash cycles. Her black undersuit was shredded, offering little protection or modesty. Without a word, she handed him the shirt. He took it, confused. "What's this for?" "Yours is ruined," she said, nodding at his own torn tunic. Then she looked down at herself. "As is mine." It was an offering, a practical one, but something more, an acknowledgement of their shared state, their shared survival. He held it out to her. "You take it. You did most of the work." A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she took the shirt from him. She pulled off the tattered remnants of her undersuit top, her back to him. Jax couldn't help but stare. Her back was a roadmap of old scars, faint white lines against her shimmering skin. But there was a new mark, too. A dark, angry bruise in the shape of his handprint, right between her shoulder blades. A mark he had left, a claim he had made without even realizing it. She pulled the gray shirt over her head. It was absurdly large on her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, the hem falling to her mid-thigh like a dress. The soft, drab fabric was a stark contrast to her lethal grace and otherworldly beauty. And yet, it worked. It was a symbol of something new, a quiet truce in their personal war. He smirked, the first genuine, easy smile he'd felt in what felt like a lifetime. "Looks better on you anyway," he said, his voice rough. She turned, tugging at the unfamiliar garment. She looked down at it, then back up at him. She walked over and gently touched the throbbing bite mark on his shoulder, her fingertips tracing the indentations. "This also looks good on you," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her own lips. It transformed her face, softening the warrior's edges. The klaxon was silent. The mercs were dead. For the moment, they were safe. but they were still trapped in the belly of a dead ship on a hostile world, bonded by a bloody ritual he barely understood. He looked at her, this impossible alien warrior wearing his stupid shirt, and he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't a prisoner anymore. He wasn't her property. They were a team. "So," he said, gesturing vaguely at the carnage around them. "What now, mate?" Vala's smile widened, regaining a spark of its old, dangerous confidence. "Now," she said, her voice a low, thrilling promise. "We find a way out of this wreck, and then we show them all what it means to hunt the bonded." She leaned against him, her head resting for a brief moment against his unbitten shoulder, a silent gesture of trust earned in blood and fire and passion. In the quiet of the dead garden, surrounded by their fallen enemies, Jax felt a flicker of something he had long thought dead: hope.